Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Kindred Episode 1. It is a new show from FX/Hulu, which is based on a book from the 70s, a science fiction story about a young black woman who starts traveling backwards and forwards through time. How exactly is a bit of a mystery, at least after this first episode. It seems to be some sort of natural thing to her, but she lives in 2016 LA, not quite present day, 2016 specifically, and starts traveling back in time at random when she's like sleeping or when she's sleepwalking or whatever, and to 1815 on a plantation where there's some things that kind of stoke some mysteries of her own past that kind of come up. So that's the basic premise of it. I didn't know a whole lot got into this. I saw that it was based on a book. I got the time travel element perhaps from the trailer, but other than that, I went in pretty cold, just sort of like, okay, what is this? Let's have a look. It's the first episode by and large is mostly a character study. Obviously, it sets up the premise by the end, but it kind of the first couple of times like there's technically some time travel. It mostly just presents itself like it might be a dream, like it might be a nightmare, and that's what she kind of thinks it is, even though it felt very real. But by the end, it's like, no, she is physically traveling back in time and then returning. She's physically moving. It's not just like a consciousness thing. So I think that's pretty clear by the end of the episode, but I'll get into it. I'll give my thoughts and feelings, and then maybe give a spoiler warning, maybe talk a little bit about the character and maybe some of the things that at play here. Obviously, some of the themes are obvious, like you're not going to do this and not be examining racism in some capacity. You're having a modern black woman travel back and having to experience what it was like on a plantation and seeing how other black people in the time are treated, and immediately feeling like she's in some kind of danger. It's funny that me and Connor have been doing Outlander. Obviously, this is a very different time period and person and example, but in the same kind of idea where immediately, oh, this is dangerous for you to even be here. Anyone is a threat to you here, pretty much. Certainly the white people at the very least. So obviously it's quite heavy topic wise, which is actually one of the things that it kind of like, it almost has to be really good for me right now to be enthusiastic, just because part of me is like, oh my god, this is going to be so depressing. This is going to be a depressing show, and sometimes you have to be in the mood for a really depressing story. And so obviously I'm getting into this still with a science fiction element, and I'm hoping for a character that I really like and want to root for. I'm hoping for the fun mystery element to kind of try and counterbalance some of the heavier topics that it's going to be tackling, because that stuff is going to be tense, it's going to be uncomfortable, even if it's halfway decently written or directed, because ultimately the subject just lends itself to feeling those things. So the first episode, I would say, is pretty solid overall. I don't think it's a complete knockout of the park, but I do think that the lead actress, let me get her name here, Mallory Johnson, I think she is pretty solid in the role and does well with a character who's intentionally, maybe supposed to have a bit of a layer to her, in that she's presented as this young woman who has just sold a family property, an old brownstone that was left to her by her grandmother, and bought a house in LA with the money she made, and she's still living off the money she made from that house. And her auntie and uncle, who are kind of her only family that are around, are a bit judgmental about it, right? The uncle immediately, the auntie a bit more diplomatic, but ultimately still is worried she's just being spontaneous, that she's not prepared to, move on with her life or take responsibility and things like that. Criticizes a bunch of little things. There's kind of a heated debate at one point in the episode between them, and it sets up all that, and it also sets up a new love interest for her as well that she meets early on in the episode, and we get some of their chemistry together and their back and forth, and then ultimately kind of the kindling of the romance in this first episode. And I don't think any of this is remotely spoilery. This is all very much just the setting up of who these characters are and what they're doing. I think her performance is good. She's definitely the best actor out of all of the main cast. But typically you want that when your lead's going to be your predominant person on the screen most of the time. It's not an ensemble in the sense that it's not equal. It's her show, and then everyone else is supporting. So that's good. I think the direction at times is pretty decent as well. Like there's moments in the first couple of times she travels where it feels like it might just be a dream or a nightmare or something like that. There's a couple of creepy little moments of cinematography that I thought were pretty solid. Like it felt like they were going for a mood and it was effectively feeling a little creepy and a little unhinged. You know, like oh, something's not quite right here. And not just in the same way that you always shoot a dream sequence or that you always shoot something like that. And I guess part of that is because it isn't a dream sequence, really. You know, it's not a spoiler to say she's traveling in time. That's the entire premise of the show. It's just the first couple of times she doesn't realize she's doing that. She thinks she's sleepwalking and she's just dreaming something or something, you know, like that. And that's very much how the first couple of times play out. And then it gets more overt. It gets more, no, she is physically here and so on and so on. So that stuff's good. I think the premise is also really good. Like that's kind of one of the most exciting things about the whole show, especially when it reveals something towards the end of the episode that I'll get into after spoiler warnings. The premise is good. The premise is intriguing, especially since it's not like she stumbles into like a secret lab where there's a time machine and she gets in the time machine and she starts like freaking out because of that. This is like part of like why is this happening? Why is she doing this? There's allusions early on that her mother had mental health issues from the auntie, and it's like, wait, did her mother experience something like this and people just thought she was crazy? And that's what's now playing out with her, but she's going to harness it better. She's going to learn what it is better and maybe use it in some way, you know, whatever we may be doing with the story. But it's a very intriguing premise that does lend itself to a lot of cool ideas. Especially when you have this character who's very well set up in this first episode. You know, she wants to be a TV writer. She is watching like soap operas that she used to watch all the time with her grandmother and sort of studying them. And I don't necessarily know exactly, without watching more, the exact thematic importance of this, but there's like a whole scene in this episode where she talks about how she's watching episodes and then writing down everything that happened. She's breaking it down to sort of study how they're constructed and, you know, how the scenes are put together with the actions. And this felt like very specific to me. It felt like this is thematically important, and I'm not really quite sure why yet, because I've only watched one episode. I'm sure this is the sort of thing that on a rewatch after you've watched the whole season or whatever, you'll get a bit more out of these details. But it did feel very intentional. You know, I don't know if it's saying something like, you know, this is all going to be about, like, because of the premise of her jumping backwards and forwards through time and learning more about her past and stuff and you know, whatever, like the idea that she's breaking down the scenes, the idea that she's doing that in life but out of order, and she's trying to make sense of it in the same way she's trying to make sense of a TV script. I don't know, like, I mean, I'm probably reaching there, but it did feel very intentional, and it feels like the idea of her trying to understand the pieces of a story felt relevant to what she's ultimately going through in the story. And there's little directorial touches as well that I thought were nice. Like at one point the auntie drops off some oranges or something similar, and there's a scene later on when she's talking to her love interest character Kevin, and it's a very, you know, it's a late night scene. They're standing in the kitchen, there's like basically no lights on, so it's got this sort of, you know, blue sort of moonlit kind of feel to it. It's very dark, everything's very, you know, blue in tone, except these oranges, which are sitting in the middle of the frame on the counter, right in the middle of the shot. There's these oranges sitting there between the two of them, and even that felt like a very intentional little choice to sort of like make you think of her earlier conversation with her auntie during this moment, during this particular conversation they're having, and maybe connecting some dots because of that. At least I don't think oranges themselves have any thematic relevance. Maybe there's something about oranges I don't know that would be relevant to this character story, but there's just little things like that felt very intentional throughout, where even if there's not some big grand importance, the scenes themselves felt memorable because there's these little flourishes that just kind of stuck out here or there. So that's good. So I had a bit of a style, lead actress is good, and the premise is really strong. Or at the very least very intriguing, if nothing else. But I wouldn't say it was a complete, like, you know, success of a pilot necessarily either. And I think part of it is because it is, you know, obviously the topic gets quite heavy when she's in the past, and characters start referring to her, in very old-fashioned ways, racist ways, to be as direct about it as I can. And her having to run from people and realizing she's in danger. Like, there's definitely, I was a little worried for a second. I was like, oh my god, is she just going to be stuck here in this horrible time period now for the rest of the show? And we're just going to be, dealing with that? Because that sounds like that sounds a bit depressing. But then there's the extra little reveal that happens afterwards that means that there's an element of, I don't want to say fun, but there's an element of intrigue that's sort of put on top of that. It feels like it's more important than just directly doing she's in danger because she's in this time period. And I think I appreciated that because it kind of felt like, okay, it's not just going to be the horror, like the real world horror of being here. There's other science fiction elements to kind of consider. There's other things to talk about and explore. There's other goals that this character and the characters around her are going to have that, should balance out the despair is the word I want to use, the despair of the situation and the time period. So I think I'll give the spoiler warning at this point, just so I can talk about the characterization a little bit more and kind of the premise, and even the opening of the episode, which kind of like it does that thing where it shows you some obscure things from later on, and it's like 2 days prior, and 2 days prior when it cut back and said 2 days ago, right? I thought, that's not a lot of time, but obviously we're playing with time travel here, so a lot can happen in the past if they're only in the present day for small pockets of time, so that 2 days later can be the end of the season or something towards the end of the season without it feeling weird. But yeah, you see that there's clearly been stuff going on. She's sending a hasty email. There's a gun in the fridge. Things look like they've been. She's hurt. She's lying on the floor. Stuff's happening, right? And we see later on that when she's hurt in the past, she's not. That's not it's real. She's getting hurt. She comes back at the end with a black eye because she got punched. Clearly that's going to be something that is, the threat is real. None of this, it's not like getting into a computer simulation, or it's not like she's a ghost in the past. Like, she is there, she is physically there, she will get hurt if she is hurt, and probably killed as well. That's a danger, that's a real threat. Not that I expect it until the end of the story, if at all, because she's the main character, but the threat is there. So it cuts back 2 days and we get the introduction to the character, and this idea that she is maybe a bit naive and she's doing this spontaneous thing where she's moved across country. I suspect there's going to be more to the backstory as to what was going on in her life in Brooklyn before she made this choice. I also expect there's probably some history to the house itself that maybe even dates back to this kind of time period or something. The idea that she was close with her grandmother. And then the big thing of the episode, of course, is that her mother, who's believed to have been died in some sort of car crash, I think it was, when she was a kid, actually traveled back in time like she is now, and has been stuck in the past for, I think she said, 12 years? It was something like that. I can't remember the exact year count, but it was, it was over a decade. And that was the fascinating part for me, because it was like, okay, she's stuck in the past for a little bit towards the end of the episode, and this is where she really sort of comes to grasp where she is and the sort of the time frame. And there's a white guard who makes some makes a pass at her, basically, which she sort of politely declines, and he says, well, you better get home now, and he actually mistakes her for someone else. So the racism here is really weird, and that he thinks he's recognizing someone else that he clearly has affection for, but also completely doesn't recognize her. That felt like an intentional choice to me. But she goes to, she's told to go somewhere, and I think what I really liked is because the previous times in the episode that she traveled back to the past, there was this recurring theme where she was saving this child, this white child. First when he's a baby and he's turned over in his crib, she flips him over. And then later on, when it's a bit more vivid, she actually rescues him from drowning. And it's funny because the mother, who's the rich white woman from the plantation, thinks she's trying to hurt him when she's giving him CPR, because she doesn't understand what CPR is. But she saves the kid's life. And she's kind of become this legend, because she's popped up when he was a baby and then a kid, that the locals like thinks she's a demon or a ghost or something. But she's directed to this woman in the time period, and it turns out that this is her mother, and her mother's been stuck here for some time, and is shocked to find out that this is her, or at least like confirms that it's her daughter, and then is shocked to discover what year she's from. Because she asked when Dana asked, what year is it, 1815? She's like, well, what year did you come from? And she's like, 2016. She's like, wait, what? Like, I've not been gone that long. She's been here for like over a decade, but obviously, I think she said it was 1993 when she went back, and she was hoping that Dana would know how to travel back forwards in time. And Dana, of course, is like, I don't really control it. It just kind of happens. And of course it happens again. And this time, obviously, Kevin saw her disappear and saw her reappear. One of the things that I'm not looking forward to, which is set up in this episode, though, is so the neighbors call the police in the 2 days in the future at the start of the episode. And then we see them interact a little bit and later on in the episode after Dana streams waking up from one of these trips. And they're asking, like, if she's okay. And they're kind of, insinuating or asking, without saying it out loud, is Kevin, like, are you screaming because of him? Has he hurt you? And they kind of insinuate it really heavily, and it's this awkward moment, and it's, it's whatever. But I'm not really looking forward to that continuing to, like, get, become more extreme. And the reason why I think it will become more extreme is because when Dana's fighting off the white guy from 1815, he punches her and she gets the black eye that I mentioned. When she comes back to the present day, she's got this black eye. And she's not realised that she's travelled back forwards in time yet, and she scratches Kevin in the neck. And I can't help but, assume that when the neighbours maybe see them leaving the next day, or someone else sees them soon, it's going to look like there's domestic abuse going on of some kind. It's going to look like he's hurting her and she's fighting back. And we obviously know that's not the case. But I have to be honest, the thought of having to go through these accusations and these scenes does feel a bit miserable to me. And I'm not so sure I want to sit through those scenes. Because obviously we already have the extremely heavy topic of slavery and racism. And, like all the other things that are going to come with this, like I assume heritage is going to play into a role in this, again, assuming the house is passed down somehow from this time period. This idea of Dana not really, like, living in reality in a weird way, where she has these dreams of being a TV writer, but she's kind of just, like, locked into this easy money. And this is maybe a bit judgmental, but assuming that all the things that are being said by her auntie and uncle, and that this is like a pattern of behavior from her, where she isn't necessarily taking responsibility and handling things like an adult, maybe this idea of, like, the harsh reality of this, like, pastime period is going to really snaps her into life and wakes her up and, has her go through her arc. But you've got all that at play. You've got all those things at play, but you've got all that, and then you're adding in this idea that we're going to be dealing with male on female violence, and this Kevin, who, as far as we know, is perfectly nice person. Like, in fact, and to be fair, the writing of the episode does kind of, like, set up the idea of it early on. When she's at the restaurant earlier on, and her phone's dead, and she asks for a charger, Kevin just says, "Hey, I'm driving out that way, I can give you a lift home." And obviously she's like, "I don't know you, that's a bit weird, you could be trying to murder me," kind of thing. And he's not an idiot. He realizes that that's what her concern is, so he turns around and announces to the rest of the staff at the restaurant, "Hey, I'm Kevin, you know me, I work here. If this woman turns up dead after I give her a lift home, it was me." So he tries to put her mind at ease and, like, says, "Hey, look, accountability. I can't just go and kill you because these people are here. They know that I'm with you. I'll be caught, blah, blah, blah." Right? But that does sort of, it's a very jokey way to introduce it, but it does kind of introduce the idea of, not specifically violence between men and women, but, like, the idea of the vulnerability, the idea that those types of accusations might come up are thematically just, sneakily introduced in a way that you don't necessarily realize it in the scene, but then as the rest of the episode starts to play out, you go, oh, wait a minute, like that was like almost like a weird foreshadowing of the idea that there's going to be this thought from other people, and it might look more and more like it's happening, even if it isn't actually happening. And I suspect that we're going to see things in the past that tie into this theme as well. Call me crazy, I don't expect the guy who owns the plantation to be a nice gentleman. Just a sneaking suspicion, just a hunch. But so it does a good job of setting up that theme, and much like the TV writing thing and the deconstructing of like the actions and the characters, I do wonder if that thematically ties into like her solving the puzzle of the time, and what her mother's actually been doing here, and so on. It does beg the question that she probably did pass it down to her, if the mother did it by accident once but it then never went back, and now the daughter's just going backwards and forwards. Is there some sort of origin story to this that it's going to get into? I have no idea. Honestly, this could be the sort of thing where they just never explain it. It's just something they naturally have. And, I think the metaphor of it, and this is, again, I've only seen one episode, so the rest of it could completely shoot this to shit. I have no idea. But the metaphor of this premise, I would imagine, is the idea that time period in the past, the past, the history of Black America is still very much with everyone. It's not something that can be forgotten about. It's still relevant, and that's why you're doing this story where she's sort of going backwards and forwards in time. And of course, this idea that she is a younger person, a naive person perhaps, who the harsh reality of all this is going to maybe like hit harder, going to a time period where she wouldn't have had the rights to have these goals, and she wouldn't have the rights to do whatever she wanted and the freedom to do what she wanted. Maybe there's some sort of story mechanic there of, in the present day, she has all the possibilities in the world, and she's kind of wavering. She's kind of just, she's got like a broad like idea of something she wants to do, but it's a very hard profession to get into. You don't just become a TV writer, out of the blue. But in the past, she's going to see how much harsher things are, how much harder things are, and I don't know if there's going to be sort of a sort of later coming of age or a growing up element to that side of the story as well. I could see it. There's definitely lots of things at play here. It doesn't surprise me this comes from a book. It's a book that I believe is fairly well respected as a piece of science fiction, and I can kind of see some of the themes and ideas just kind of already starting to bubble. And it's the sort of thing where, like, I may be off in some of my interpretations right now, but I could totally believe that with more episodes and more of the story, that it would become fuller formed, and I would understand what the text is saying to me a little bit better. But it definitely felt like there was a lot of intentional things planted in this first episode. So I thought it was a fairly solid episode, all things. I know the reviews, I had a quick look at, after I watched it, I had a quick look at the reviews to see what the general consensus was. And it does seem to be a bit muted. There is a fair amount of negative reviews that don't think it lives up to the book. Obviously, I will never have that context because I've not read the book, but it is interesting to see sometimes these different reactions to it. I thought the first episode, by and large, was very solid and was paced relatively well. I wasn't thinking that, oh, this needs to be trimmed down. It's it's dragging its feet or anything like that. It felt like it had a good big dramatic endpoint with the reveal of the mother and this idea that she's trapped in the past, and this is something that Dana's going to have to try and deal with. Possibly save her, possibly, and I can't imagine her telling her auntie that, her mother's actually alive, and after all this time, there's definitely some hints and things in the episode that I was picking up on, and I'm sure there's lots that I didn't, that are teasing where the story's going to go and what it's going to be saying. But yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad by any means, and I think the premise is quite interesting. So that is my thoughts on the first episode of Kindred. It's just kind of frustrating that this all came out at once on Hulu. It's not a weekly release, which makes it a lot more difficult to consider even covering all the episodes of. So I don't think I'm going to. especially since the viewer retention for any sort of show that's like released in a binge format tends to die quite quickly. But it's even worse when it's not Netflix. Netflix tends to retain, reviews tend to retain their audience a lot better than other places. So unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to review the rest of this, but I would say check it out. And it was a fairly solid pilot. I'd be curious to see in the comments if you've watched more of it, what you think of the season as a whole. I think I'm putting this out on, what was today? Thursday. So I think it came out on Tuesday. So, some people probably have binged the whole thing by now. So, let me know how the whole season is. And I do believe it didn't finish the story, because I thought it might be a limited series, but everything it seems to be coming from the other reviews I glanced at was that it was, the story's not done yet. Like, the whole book's not been adapted yet. So I don't know if it's a long book or if they're just really, not padding, but like, developing it out a little bit to add a bit more stuff in for a TV show. But yeah, that's Kindred episode 1. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, and of course you can support all the content by becoming a member of the channel or going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting us over there for any amount you wish. So thank you very much once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV, and I will see you next time.